So hello everyone and welcome to RBCM at Home Summer. My name is Chris O'Connor and I'm a learning program developer here at the Royal BC Museum. My colleague Jenny Arnold is usually the host of RBCM at Home Summer on Fridays, but she is across the street because like we did a few weeks ago, we're doing a return visit to the BC Legislature buildings and meeting our friends at the Parliamentary Players. So we're really excited to be able to return and meet more historical figures and have more conversations. So we're going to meet two new historical figures today, but I wanted to first introduce you to Nicholas, who will give us an introduction to the buildings, and the program, and just give us a little hello. Hello, Nicholas.
Hello. Hi, everyone. So as you can see out there, we are currently standing in the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia, which is located on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, also known as the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations. Last session, you spoke to Francis Rattenbury, the architect of these buildings, which have stood here for 124 years. And in all that time, they were the site where members of the Legislative Assembly came to debate new laws, initiate debate, and discuss the politics of the day. And today, we are going to have a chance to meet some MLAs ourselves. And we're going to start with BC's longest serving politician, Mr. Thomas Hubert Uphill. Mr. Uphill? Mr. Uphill!
Well, let's see now. There was 1920, 1924, 28, 33, 37, 1941, 45, 49, 1952, 53, and 1956. See, those were the years that I, Thomas Uphill, won. I won an election in every one of those years and consequently won my seat as an MLA time and time again in this building. That's 40 years of service to the province I love, and even more important to me, 40 years of service to the good people of my riding, Fernie, BC. That's 11 consecutive election victories. Well, I did lose one, of course, my first one in 1916, but I don't really count that one, you see. I like to maximize my successes and minimize my defeats. Why do I am the longest serving MLA in BC's history, and I don't mind saying I'm a bit of a legend here in the Assembly and in this fine province. Some would no doubt use the word infamous to describe me. Makes no difference to me what you choose to call me, though, eh? Fame is fame. I myself am darn proud to have represented Fernie for such a good, long stretch of time. Oh, that's right, my friends. I'm not from Vancouver, and I'm not from Victoria. I come from the heartland of BC, and we interior folks always need to fight a bit harder to get noticed. We need to yell a bit louder to get heard. And sometimes during my extensive tenure in this house, I found it useful to make a bit of a spectacle of myself, be a bit of a nuisance, just to make sure everyone was listening. Well, there was at one time during the war, for instance, that I joined the Babies of Britain Club. Now, that is to say, I taught myself how to knit and passed my time sitting there in the house with needles clicking away while my fellow members droned on and on about some boring point or another. I did it for the attention at first, but after a while I was able to send bucketfuls of baby garments overseas, woven by my own two hands. The press loved it. But I think one of my greatest moments might have been a nice little speech I gave as the sole representative of the province's beleaguered Labour Party. Let's see if I can remember a bit. There are great advantages to being in a political party of one. I can hold a caucus meeting all by myself. Nobody tells me what to do. I just do my best for the people, and especially for the people of Fernie who elect me. And I tell you, there is great satisfaction in being free, because every now and then you get a real chance to do something to help somebody. And if doing something to help somebody might hurt your party, well, I just discuss it with me. If you're honest with yourself, you will be honest with all people. When you climb out of a coal mine like I did, and you find yourself above the ground and in a wonderful building such as this one, well, no matter how much or how often you wash yourself down, you'll always find a little bit of coal dust left on you somewhere. Always. And these bigwigs in Victoria, they should be able to smell the mines all over me. I'm glad they could still see the mark of a worker on this member of the legislature. After all, I came here to represent those folks. I spoke for them. For example, be it resolved that this House requests the Cabinet of the Dominion of Canada to revoke Order in Council BC 11374WM83, thereby restoring the free manufacture and sale of beer in accordance with provincial regulations. A worthy cause to get behind, might we agree? And a popular resolution for many of my constituents in Fernie. Beer. But be it beer or workers' rights or women's rights, whatever the cause, whatever the issue, I never tire of standing in that chamber and speaking my piece. Well, speaking of women's rights, I give a nice little speech on that too. The strength of a nation is represented by the virtue and intelligence of its womanhood. If history teaches us anything, it is that no nation has ever risen higher than its women. Noble womanhood will make a great nation. Weak womanhood will prove the undoing of the strong.
Hold on just a minute, Mr. Uphill.
Ah, Miss Jamieson, a pleasure as always. Everyone meet Laura Jamieson, one of the first women elected to this legislative assembly and a fellow traveller in the fight for workers' rights. Did you have a question about the oratory?
Mr.
Oh,
Uphill.
Tom, please.
Tom. Now, I know you've served for a considerable span of years.
11 consecutive elected victories.
Precisely. And I would never presume to give you advice on giving a speech.
Oh, that was one of my best received in all the years.
Be that as it may, don't you see this virtuous womanhood nonsense as a trap?
Well, I only need to be supportive.
Oh, but it's terribly confining. A woman has to be an exemplar, ladylike and refined to be listened to at all. But at the same time, by her virtue is thought to be unsuited for the muck and grime of politics. Made it very difficult for me to do my job, let me tell you.
Playing a role, I know how that feels. I was supposed to be the voice for the worker, for the coal miner, people whose life experiences would be as alien to the bigwigs in this building as if I were to speak for the people from Lost Atlantis. In order to be heard, I had to play a down-to-earth, entertaining stereotype. But I had a softer side too.
Oh, indeed.
Indeed, I was a devoted knitter for one. Oh yes, it started as a joke to support my friend Nancy Hodges.
Oh, who would become the first woman ever to be appointed as speaker in all the Commonwealth.
Well, she taught me how to do it properly. Yeah. Indeed, she did.
Well, I rather defied stereotypes as well, and I never thought that I would end up here, especially not as one of the first women ever to become a BCMLA. Well, you see, I was born in Ontario in 1882, a time where a woman's role in society was severely limited, let alone in impoverished orphans. But thanks to the charity of a kind uncle, I became the first one of my 5 siblings to graduate high school and the only one to attend university. I wish to pass this gift of education on to others, so I set up a one-room schoolhouse in the coal mining town of Fernie, BC.
My home riding. Did you enjoy it?
Oh, the conditions were miserable, but the Rocky Mountains that soared up around me dazzled my senses. I became an avid climber, even a member of the Alpine Club of Canada, at a time where all members by statute had to wear trousers.
Scandalous.
Now, in 1906, you can imagine this ruffled a few feathers. But from the top of Crow's Nest Mountain, I could look at the province with which I had fallen deeply in love, British Columbia. And I also fell in love with someone else. Well, my dear husband, the Vancouver lawyer and social reformer, Jack Jamieson. Now, too poor to live in the city, we settled in the wild frontier of Burnaby. And soon our house became the center for some very important gatherings. Women had been petitioning the government for suffrage, the right to vote, since 1872. By 1916, we were finally on the verge of breakthrough. Suffragists like me were meeting for the very first time, attending rallies, chairing their own meetings, giving speeches. You know, I was known for targeting the restaurants at lunch hour. While the workers were all seated at their tables, I'd sneak in with a compatriot to discuss the principles behind our ideas. Now, Mr. Uphill, would you say that we've been working equally hard on this live stream?
I would.
Ah, so you'd agree that people of all genders are equal. At least as far as talking to these folks is concerned.
I would.
It follows that people of all genders can be deemed equal in other areas, does it not?
It does.
If women and men are deemed equal, should they not be capable of receiving the rights and privileges that go along with it?
They should.
So, would you agree that the present situation in which women who are equally citizens of this country are unequally barred from voting is reprehensible and cannot be allowed to continue?
It is.
Then will you join me in calling for votes for women?
Votes for women.
Once I had everyone's attention, then I'd leap up and hand out pamphlets to the crowd that had gathered. I'll take it from here, Tom.
By all means.
In 1917, a referendum was held, and British Columbia became the 4th province in Canada in granting women the right to vote. Then, that next year, Mary Ellen Smith became the first woman ever to be elected to this legislature, who was quite willing to see her here. Now, the one dress in a sea of mustaches. Now, this euphoria didn't last long, I'm afraid. That same year, my young son passed away, and I withdrew from advocacy to focus on my family and my health. Tragedy struck again, this time taking my dear husband. I could have retreated from the world in my grief, but Jack had left a legacy as a juvenile court judge that needed to be protected. So I dried my tears, and I won the votes to replace him on the bench. Then, in 1939, I resigned that judgeship to run for a seat in our provincial legislature. Campaigning could be deeply unfair at times. Do you remember when Porter once asked me if I had bought a new hat for election night? Well, I told him that I was more concerned with what was under the hat. Well, it seems like my constituents agreed, and I won my place as a member of BC's official opposition. Now, if you were to walk into the legislative chamber, you will notice that it is divided into two sides. Now, on one side, we have the government, usually composed of the party or a coalition of parties to win the most seats in an election. The government sets the agenda and runs the various ministries of our province. Now, I sat on the other side as a member of the opposition. Now, although we are outnumbered, opposition members carry out an essential task, scrutinizing the government to ensure that they are making the best possible decision for every person in the province. I spent my 3 terms holding the government accountable to those weakest in society. I demanded the care of children and the elderly, protections for women on the job, and the right to vote for everyone, regardless of origin or religion. Saddens me to say this, but the fight for equality had stagnated since the days of the suffrage movement. It had been over 20 years, and I was only the 4th woman ever to be elected here. Even more astonishing, only people who were deemed as British subjects were allowed to vote, and our province had made precious little headway in correcting other ethnic or religious discrimination. Some of my suffragist peers had settled into complacency, or even worse, active support for cruel and exclusionary policies. But if the women of my day wished for equality, they had to realize that low-income women were doubly oppressed, as were immigrants, racial minorities, indigenous peoples, and others. I firmly believe that so long as there are oppressed groups anywhere, so long as there is want and fear, then our work is not done. Well, you see, it's like climbing a mountain. You focus on the problem that's ahead of you. Foothold here, handhold there, and on to the next, and before you know it, you reach the top. Now, congratulations, you've accomplished something great, but if you look around from your new vantage point, you can see other mountains that you have yet to climb. Now, there exist mountains in your day, just as there were in mine. And it may seem impossible for you to surmount them, but take it from me, Laura Emma Jamieson, the 4th woman ever elected in this legislature, one of BC's first alderwomen, a juvenile court judge, suffragist, leader, teacher, speaker, writer, mountain climber, and all-around dangerous woman. You're on the right track. Just focus on the first step, and then on to the next thing. Even if the slope is 10,000 feet tall, I am sure you will reach the top. Thank you very much for your time, and I believe, Mr. Uphill, if you'd like to come back, we are open to questions.
So Chris, before if there's any questions, I know I have some questions. I have one question for yourself. What was the biggest difference between being an MLA and being a judge?
Oh, that is a very good question. Well, I feel like my time in the legislature, I felt like I had the opportunity to make change. And being a juvenile court judge, I was able to make change from younger people's change. So interact with them, that's where the change started. But I do believe that the goal was to get here, so more people's voices were able to be heard than when I was a judge.
Thank you. And then for yourself, what exactly was your position in the coal mine? Were you a miner? Did you have a different type of position?
Indeed, well, I actually left my schooling at 13 to work in the mines to support my family, indeed. And so I was indeed in the muck and grime of the coal mine. And then afterwards, as I got older, I became an alderman myself, with a vocation me and Ms. Jamieson share. Indeed, so I was fighting for the workers' rights at a very early stage. And then, like Ms. Jamieson, I came here to get that same message across on a larger scale.
Wonderful. And I have a question for both of you. What do you think is the biggest difference for how it's being run, like MLA, the Parliament, versus when you were here? What do you think is the biggest difference between now and then?
Well, certainly there are more women in Parliament today, so that would be a big difference. Now, much like yourself, I also had to fight to make myself heard, only being the fourth woman there. In my time, there were only 3 women in the chamber.
Indeed. In addition to that, I agree with everything Ms. Jamieson has said, of course. In addition to that, I would say that there are more people of color. Indeed, big difference from when I was in office, indeed. Yes. It wasn't until after I left office that the first people of color were elected.
Thank you so much for your answers. Chris, are there any questions in the chat or in the comment section on Facebook Live?
We don't have any questions yet, but I'm wondering, because you both are around the same age, as you were coming up, what advice were you given by others, and what advice did you hand down or pass on as you were further along in your careers?
Well, the advice that I received from the other women that were also suffragists and were fighting for our rights was to never back down and always make yourself heard. And I took that to heart and passed it down to others. And now I can see the benefits that has caused for everyone. We have a long way to go still, but we must keep making ourselves heard.
The question was advice that we would like to pass along, indeed. Well, I would say that my advice would be to follow your own heart. Otherwise, you can't go wrong. Indeed, as many of you may not know, I served as an independent for the majority of my career. I didn't align myself with a party. I felt that you could get much more done by yourself, looking after your own people on your own. Indeed, follow your heart.
Thank you. I also have another question as, after your political careers, what did you do after for retirement? What types of things did you do?
Oh, I suppose you knitted, did you not? Well, I love to mountain climb, as I've already mentioned. Now, I was older when I retired, so just a lovely stroll around and to take in the nature and breathe in the air. That is what I love to do.
Sounds quite lovely. Indeed. Well, most of my career, the latter half of my life rather, was devoted to my career. I actually was first elected back in 1920 at the age of 45. I'd spent the majority of my life until then fighting for workers' rights, being mayor of Fernie, of course, and a vocation that I would come back to during my career. But indeed, I spent the most of the latter half of my career in politics.
Thank you. Chris, are there any more questions?
And then lastly, because you both represented different parts of the province, Fernie and Burnaby, For those who haven't been to those places, how would you describe your communities?
Oh, would you like to describe Fernie? I mean,
Describing Fernie, a charming little town. Of course, when I first got there was a bit of a ramshackle mining town, indeed. I like to think that I, as mayor especially, contributed to the beautification of the area. It's a charming area now, of course.
yes, and in my time, Burnaby was not what it is today. It has definitely developed and been built up. When I lived there were barely any houses. As I mentioned, it was sort of a wild frontier. However, a lot of growth has happened as with Fernie.
Great,
I have
thank
a
you.
question.
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
please.
Can I ask you a question?
Please.
Mr. Uphill, you were known as a bit of a prankster in your time. Could you regale us with a story of one of your practical jokes?
Ah, yes, indeed. Well, there was the one time that I was feeling particularly bored with the events, the procedures of the Parliament, and fancied myself a little music. So I indeed brought in a little handheld radio into the chamber. Indeed, I was reprimanded by the speaker and told to turn it off. Wasn't kicked out though, so I felt that was a bit of an achievement. Ruffled a few feathers indeed.
I don't know if there is any more questions.
No, I'm just looking now, and there are no questions. Not right now, but how much longer will you both be at the BC Legislature? In case there are people that are watching that might want to come and meet you in person.
Yes, so we'll be here until the end of summer. September 6th, correct me if I'm wrong, is the last day that our summer program will be running. So if you come, and there will be a variation of us. It might be me, Laura Jamieson, it might be Mr. Uphill, it could be Francis Rattenberry, the architect of these buildings, or Miss Nellie Cashman, known as the miner's angel of her time.
Mm. And during our first session, we met the two of them. So yeah, so if people would like to go and visit the four of them in person, take a chance to meet one of them, please do. Thank you so much, the two of you, for joining us today and telling us a little bit about your history. That is very fascinating and very interesting, and also really important for the province of BC. So thank you both so much. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Jenny. And until next time.
Yeah, do you have
Right,
any final words?
Oh yeah, final words.
Yeah, follow your heart, as he mentioned. And
yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Oh, and if you happen to smell a bit of coal dust as you're walking around these grounds here, or this building perhaps, our house, well, that's probably me. Still here, still watching out for the working people of this province, and still darn proud to do so. Have a lovely day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.